name is Saeed, and I'm the student director for the Mill series. So tonight, we have Angus Johnston with us. Angus Johnston is a historian of American student activism and of student life and culture more broadly. An advocate of student organizing, he is the founder of the website studentactivism.net. He teaches history at the City University of New York, where he received his PhD in 2009. Johnston is particularly interested in student activism beyond the 1960s, in the history of student government, and in the role of students in the university. He has delivered lectures and workshops on the history of American student activism to undergraduate audiences at colleges across the country. Tonight, he will be answering the question, who deserves a platform? And also offer a skeptical response to the Mill series. Please join me in welcoming Angus Johnston.
Thank you very much. I am very excited to be here. I arrived this morning and had a lovely lunch with many of you who I recognize in this room, and then wound up rewriting much of my speech on the basis of that conversation. So if I stumble a couple of times, bear with me. Just one caveat to the introduction that I got from Saeed. If you want to tweet, go ahead and tweet, because, you know. So, as I was preparing for tonight, I was looking over the conversations that I had with Brandon and thinking back to the circumstances in which I was invited, and one of the things that jumped out at me from my notes from our original discussion was that the original title of this speech that before we sort of workshopped it into the form that it appears in now, there were two changes. One was that it was, the main title was Against the Mill series, which we decided was perhaps a little bit more aggressive than we wanted to be. But the second piece was that the subtitle was Who Deserves a Platform and Why? And it strikes me that the why part is crucial, right? Because if you don't answer the why, you can't answer the who deserves a platform, because you're not operating from a shared perspective on what it means to deserve a platform, right? When you say who deserves a platform, you could mean any one of a long list of things. And so what I want to start with today is looking at this question of why we give people a platform. And specifically, within the Mill series itself, what the Mill series founders say about what the purpose of the Mill series is, and why they provide a platform to people in the service of that. So, I did the thing that every cheesy speaker does, and I looked for a quote, right? You know, a quote to start off with. And I began with the mission statement of the Mill series, which says that genuine and unfettered dialogue between political and ideological opponents is necessary for the pursuit of truth and the intellectual and characterological development of students. And similarly, Brandon Van Dyke said in a blog post for the Heterodox Academy that the pursuit of truth depends on the free exchange of reasonable conflicting ideas. Now, inherent in each of these statements is the premise that the pursuit of truth is a collaborative dialogic process, that it's not just a solitary endeavor, that it is a process that we engage in together. And that's not the only way of defining the pursuit of truth, right? You can go off into the archives and pursue truth. You can, work as a mathematician or a physicist in isolation and emerge decades later with your magnum opus, which is your contribution to the knowledge of humanity. But that's not what the Mill series is about, right? The Mill series is predicated on the premise that the way that we pursue truth is by working together, by collaborating, by coming together in a community of people. And so the question is, what are the conditions under which groups of people can come together in the pursuit of truth? What are the conditions that we need to create a constructive dialogue in pursuit of the truth? And I'd like to begin with 3 of the conditions that I think are essential to that process. The first is openness. That in order to work with somebody else to pursue truth, you need to be open to the possibility of changing your mind. You need to be intellectually humble. You need to be willing to admit the possibility that you don't know everything, that you are going to exit the conversation with a different perspective than the one that you came in with. It may not be likely, it may not be something that you expect to have happen, but you need to be at least open to the possibility that it might happen. You need to be willing to take risks. You need to be willing to put yourself out there. You need to be willing to expose yourself to the possibility of not only change, but confrontation in a way that could potentially be emotionally, psychologically, intellectually discomforting to you. And under the concept of openness, I would also say that you have to be willing to engage. You have to be willing to actually have a conversation. That it should not just be an exercise for you. It should not just be a performance. It should be an actual process of dialogue. The second principle that I would say is necessary for this kind of dialogue is sincerity. You need to be honest about what your own perspective is and where it comes from, what it is grounded in. You need to be willing to be transparent about your priors, about your underlying preferences, your underlying position within the argument, where you're coming from, what your experiences are. And you need to be committed to the process. My older daughter in kindergarten was having a conversation at recess with a group of other students. And the conversation turned, as it often does when you're in kindergarten, to who's going to grow up to marry whom, right? And in the preschool that she went to, it was a very progressive preschool, and so everybody was marrying everybody else, and people were marrying their pets, and people were marrying all sorts of different people. But there was one kid in this conversation in kindergarten who, when one of the kids said that they were going to marry somebody else who happened to be of the same gender when they grew up, said, "You can't do that. Boys can only marry girls and girls can only marry boys." Now remember, my daughter is now 15 years old, which means that this was almost 10 years ago, which means that this is before the Supreme Court decision came down. And so she comes home after school and says that she had had this conversation. I said, "Well, what did you say?" And she said, "That's not true." She said, "In 6 states," she said, "boys can marry boys and girls can marry girls." And I was like, damn, right? And I said, so what did she say? And she looked at me with all of the earnestness and all of the indignation that was in her. And she said she didn't say anything. She just walked away. And I said, so what did you do at that point? And she said, "Oh, I just said to her, if you want to have a conversation, let's have a conversation." If you want to have a conversation, you got to be willing to have a conversation, right? And that's not just a matter of insisting that the other person be willing to go to a difficult place. It's being willing to go to difficult places yourself. The third principle that I would say is really important if you want to build the kind of dialogue that's being described here is a willingness to create community, a willingness to engage as members of a community, whether it's a permanent community, or it's a long-lasting community, or whether just, in this moment, in the space where you are in, you are treating that space as a community of people engaged in a common project. And what does it mean to pursue community in that way and treat the conversation as a community in that way? I think I think it involves a lot of things, but among the things that it involves is approaching the people that you're in dialogue with as best as you are able from a perspective of generosity, intellectual and emotional generosity, taking care of each other, recognizing that you have obligations of care to each other within the process and within the dialogue, and at risk of seeming dopey, I think you have an obligation of kindness in the process. And the reason why you have these obligations is, again, that those are the circumstances in which people can actually come together in the search for truth, right? If you are not willing to be kind, if you are not willing to be generous, if you are not willing to take care of each other, then the people that you are engaging with are not going to be willing to take risks in return, and you are not going to break through the barriers that exist at the beginning of the conversation to be able to actually engage in this kind of a common project. That's a long list, right? And that's an ambitious list of conditions. And rarely will any of us meet all of them. Most of the time, most of us will fall short on many of them. But I think it's really important to note that, in the context of the Mill series in particular, and in the context of the kind of a project that the Mill series is, that those of us who are placed at the front of the room, those of us who are standing behind the lectern, those of us who are given the position of prominence in the space and in the discussion have much more of an obligation, not less, to engage in those kinds of behaviors, to engage in those kinds of practices. We are the people who are initiating the conversation. We are the people who are sparking the conversation, and we have obligations to that conversation. We have obligations to the community that we are bringing into being by standing up here in the front of the room. So, I can see a little bit of skepticism on some of the faces in this room. And I can hear people saying to themselves, generosity and humility and kindness. I thought we were talking about truth, right? I thought we were talking about the rational pursuit of knowledge. And we are. We're talking about truth. But the pursuit of truth is not, the pursuit of truth is not purely a rational endeavor. It is not governed entirely by reason because it is a communal process, because it is a process of coming together. And if we are going to come together for any project as human beings, the coming together for any project requires the building of trust. It requires us to be decent to each other. It is not enough to be right. It is not enough to be willing to be proven wrong. It is not enough to be willing to debate and to discuss. We also have an obligation to treat each other in a decent way. Pursuing truth as a community, pursuing truth in dialogue is hard work. It is risky work. It is dangerous work. And if I don't trust you, if you don't earn my trust, I'm not going to engage in that work with you. And even if I try, even if I am willing to go there with you, it is not going to work. It is not going to come to a positive outcome if it's not built on principles of interpersonal trust and decency. We're talking about building a community of scholars, a community of learners, a community of people committed to truth, and you can't build that kind of community without figuring out how to be decent to each other. And beyond that, I also have to say that the burden of building that trust, the burden of building that community, the burden of extending yourself for that community falls disproportionately on those of us for whom the risks are lowest. Those of us who have the least to lose. And who has the least to lose in this process, in building this project? It's the people who can just walk away. It's the people for whom, at the end of the day, at the end of this knock-down, drag-out argument, you go home and you go to sleep. And you sleep like a baby. For those of us who are in that position, the stakes are lower. The risks are lower. The work is less arduous. And so we have an obligation to take on that labor for ourselves. And there's another reason why those of us for whom the stakes are lower have the greater obligation, and that is that the folks for whom a subject, whatever subject it is personal, is immediate, is fraught. Those are the essential voices in any such conversation. You can't have a real conversation about any of these kinds of issues that is going to get toward the pursuit of truth, that is going to move in the direction of truth, without the participation of the people for whom the stakes are the highest. Lived experience is a form of expertise. It is not the only form of expertise. It is not an infallible form of expertise. It is not a form of expertise that trumps all other forms of expertise, but it is a form of expertise, and it is an essential form of expertise in the search for truth if we are trying to understand our shared lived experience. And so the group that has the strongest and the most relevant lived experience around a topic is the group for whom the process of engaging in the kind of dialogue that we're talking about is the most burdensome, is the most difficult, is the most fraught, and carries the most risks. If I want somebody to go out on a limb with me, if I want somebody to go out on a limb for me, it is my obligation to demonstrate that I deserve that investment of their labor. It's my obligation to earn their trust and to show them that I am worthy of trust. Because the labor that they are engaging in is a different kind than the labor that I'm engaging in that conversation. So, who deserves a platform? The question is, if we are talking about this kind of dialogue, who is worthy of participation in this discussion? Who are the people whom we should be inviting into the process of pursuing truth with us? Who is likely to contribute to a productive and generative discussion? The easiest way to talk about who we want in this discussion is to talk about who we don't want in this discussion, about the perspectives and the approaches that are going to be destructive to this kind of a conversation. And by doing that, by identifying the approaches that are going to be corrosive to that kind of a conversation, that toxic to that kind of a pursuit of truth, we can, I think, by a process of elimination, work our way forward to figuring out who we want to be in dialogue with and who we want to be participating. And unfortunately, in the world at large, in all sorts of contexts, on the internet where I spend most of my days, those who are least likely to contribute to a productive discussion are often the people who find themselves at the head of the table, right? The people who find themselves with the biggest microphone and the largest spotlight. So what am I talking about? Well, I was thinking about this, and there's 5 groups that I want to talk about specifically. The first and most obvious is trolls, right? the folks who are not willing to take a position that they actually believe in, not willing to articulate a position that is their own position, whose purpose is not to engage in the pursuit of truth, but to engage in the pursuit of lulls, right? To engage in the pursuit of their own enjoyment, their own amusement. The second, and this one may be a little bit more controversial, is the devil's advocate. The problem with a devil's advocate is that you can never change the devil's advocate's mind, because the devil's advocate is not advancing a position that they have an intellectual or emotional or personal commitment to, right? The thing about the devil's advocate is if you refute one of their points, they will jump to another. And if you refute that one, they will jump to another. And if you refute that one, they will jump to another. And if you refute that one, chances are they'll jump back to the first one because they weren't paying attention the first time that you refuted it, right? You can never move forward with a devil's advocate because the purpose of playing the devil's advocate is not the search for truth. It is not a search for common ground. It is not a search for mutual understanding. It is an attempt to poke holes in somebody else's argument, and that's not a generative process. That's not a project that leads anywhere. The third group, and this is particularly important on a college campus, is the dilettante, the person who has no real intellectual commitment to the questions that they are engaging in. We see this a lot in the most heated debates around the intellectual dark web and all of these folks who have, in many cases, a serious and legitimate body of work and scholarship in one field, who have gained a microphone or have gained a spotlight and suddenly find themselves pontificating about all sorts of stuff that they've never actually studied, that they've never actually engaged in seriously. You know, this is the moment that the folks who actually work in the fields that these folks are suddenly being quoted as experts in start tearing their hair out, right? Because it's like, okay, well, you all think that blah, blah, blah. No, we haven't thought that since 1983, right? We thought that for like 18 months in the early 80s, and then we worked through it, which you would know if you were paying attention, which you would know if you cared, which you would know if you had any interest in engaging with the intellectual work that you claim to have an interest in speaking upon. The fourth group that I think is not productive in this kind of a process is the provocateur. Because the provocateur's purpose is to get you angry. The provocateur's purpose is to get you upset. The provocateur's purpose is to cause a fuss, to cause tension, to make people retreat to their positions of safety, to their positions of comfort. The provocateur does not lead to people actually reevaluating their perspectives. The provocateur leads to people being humiliated, to people being embarrassed. The provocateur's purpose is not to follow the project through to the conclusion, but to blow it up at the beginning. And the fifth kind of person that I think is necessary to exclude from these kinds of discussions, if they are going to be productive discussions, if they are going to be generative discussions, if they are going to be discussions that actually advance our understanding and lead us closer to the truth, is the wantonly cruel. The people who just don't care who they hurt. They may be smart, they may have interesting stuff to say, but the cost of inviting them into the community is higher than the benefit that they bring. And the reason for that, and this is where I want to sort of finish, the reason why that's so important, the reason why the cruel are the fifth and final group that I talked about, is that if we are going to engage in this work, if we are going to do the work of trying to engage in a shared pursuit of truth around stuff that is difficult, right? Around stuff that is fraught, around stuff that is painful and vexing and hard, we need to acknowledge that the process itself is hard. We need to acknowledge that the process itself is work. It is real work. It is hard work. It is exhausting work. It is risky work. It is painful work. It is serious work. It is not a game. It is not a game, and it should not be treated like one. But as hard as this work is, as painful and as risky as this work is, it also has the potential to be immensely rewarding and immensely important if it is pursued from a perspective of openness, a perspective of decency, a perspective of shared risk-taking, a perspective of seriousness. The pursuit of truth is the pursuit of a shared understanding of the world. It is the pursuit of an understanding of the world that allows us to make sense of our experience as people in a cogent, coherent, grounded, real way. And that kind of mutual shared understanding is an incredibly powerful thing. It is a life-changing thing. And under the right circumstances, it can be a world-changing thing. It's incredibly hard work. It's incredibly serious work. But I think it's worth doing, and it's worth doing right. Thank you.
I have a question. Who would you invite to speak at the Mill Series? If you were in charge of picking someone who represents a viewpoint that's not commonly expressed on a college campus, who would you invite?
I was thinking about that. Well, yeah. Well, that's checked off. I'll come back next year. I'm happy to do a return engagement. It can be like Vegas. It's a really interesting question. I think it's an important question, and I think the question really has to be: you start with the topic, and then you figure out who the person is for that topic, right? Rather than just say, because I think part of the problem is when you just name names, you are naming people who have the reputation for being iconoclastic. You name the people who are names that in most cases everybody knows, right? There are people I could name who are less well known and less prominent and have less of a reputation. But if I started naming names, I would leave people out, and that would be sad and rude. But I would say that I would say a couple of things in addition to that. One is, I think that there is tremendous potential for people in dialogue with each other, framing it in that way, and not in dialogue in the sense of this is a person who is interested in this and this is a person who has done YouTube videos on this, right? But people who are actually engaged in serious work on a subject, who have serious disagreements, which may not be the most exciting or flashy disagreements, but are disagreements that are maybe fundamental and significant. And I also think that there is a tremendous mistake that is made in many of these kinds of circumstances, in imagining that A, the marginalized voices are primarily on the right, and B, that voices on the left are monolithic. That there can be debates that are not debates between the right and the left, that are debates within the left that rarely get airtime. There are debates that can be, there are perspectives on the left which are frankly harder to find on a college campus than Jordan Peterson. So I think that I realize that I'm ducking the question, but the reason that I'm ducking the question is that the process of figuring out where to go from here with something like the Mill series is a process that should be a contemplative process rather than naming names and figuring out who the next name you're going to add to the list is. Yeah.
So where do you think the Mill series has gone wrong? Who have we invited that you don't think we should?
Well, so I think what I would say is one of the things about a situation like this, a speech like this, is that I am speaking to, 50, 60, 80 people, all of whom know more about the Mill series than I do, right? You are experts in the subject about which I have been invited to speak, and I am not an expert on the subject about which I have been invited to speak. And so I intentionally framed my remarks in a broad context rather than here is what's wrong with this speaker and here is what's wrong with that speaker. I think that the principles that I laid out, if you find them worthy, if you find them compelling, they're principles that you could apply to the past of the Mill series, and you might find that some of the speakers they invited are fit the principles that I described, and others do not. I will say that the most recent I looked at several of the speeches that people gave, and quite a bit of the coverage. The most recent one that I looked at this afternoon was the YouTube video that the pseudonymous YouTube woman made after she came to campus. And I stopped watching it after about 4 minutes because the first thing that she did was she insulted all of you. And the second thing that she did was an ad for a cleanse drink. And neither of those struck me as particularly intellectually serious or productive. Yeah.
So you hinted at this a little bit, but how would you go about responding to people from a place of privilege that claim that emotion shouldn't be taken as something into account for debates or arguments?
So one thing that I would say is one of my favorite quotes is something that Charles Evans Hughes, the Chief Justice of the United States, said to William O. Douglas, who is my favorite super weird Supreme Court justice. Yeah, he was kind of a bonkers dude in a lot of different ways. But I have a real soft spot in my heart on a bunch of different levels for William O. Douglas. But he claims that when he arrived on the Supreme Court, that Charles Evans Hughes said to him, at the constitutional level at which we work, 90% of any decision is emotional. The rational part of us provides the justification for the decision that we have already decided to reach. Now, I'm not going to go quite that far. I am not going to say that the pursuit of truth is 90% emotional and 10% rational. However, I will say a couple of things. I will say first that again, the process of dialogue and building community has to take into account emotion because we are human beings and we have the capacity to harm each other, and we should try not to harm each other when we can avoid it. And hurting people is not a an inherent or a necessary part of the search for truth. You can search for truth and also be a kind person, and you should. I would also say that there is a temptation that some of us have who maybe come from the sort of hyper-rational, hyper-verbal way of looking at the world to believe that winning an argument and being right are the same thing, to have presenting the best case and being correct are the same thing, and they are not. They are not the same thing. You can win an argument in a variety of different ways. You can make a case that is the most rational case according to your premises, and if you are leaving things out of your premises, you're still going to get the answer wrong. And also, you may have flaws in your logic that you're unaware of, and if you are a better debater than the other person, you're never going to discover them. Finally, thirdly, I would also say that it took me a long time to understand the power and the importance of trusting my gut. If I am, for instance, chairing a meeting of hundreds of people, and I'm a Robert's Rules geek because, again, that's the kind of hyper-rational, hyper-verbal kind of guy that I am. And so I'm sometimes called upon to chair meetings, and sometimes they're very large meetings, and sometimes they can become very contentious. And when things are starting to go to hell, you have to respond very, very quickly, right? You have to, decide whether you are going to, how you're going to respond to a certain situation in a split second. And what I find frequently is that I will respond to the situation, and then the situation will resolve itself in whatever way. And then I will have to go back after I am no longer at the podium and say, okay, why the hell did I do that? What was motivating me? What were the 6 different things that I was taking into consideration? And in that moment of reflection, I will be able to figure out what the 6 things were. I will be able to figure out what my logical process was. But in the moment, I had to trust my gut. The relationship between rationality and emotion in any of us is way more complicated than many of us give it credit for. And if somebody is making an argument that is one that they feel very, very passionate about, and that if somebody finds the argument that you are making very, very upsetting or troubling, that is not a reason that they are right, but it is also not proof that they are wrong. Yeah?
I just wanted to add a couple of things, because things you're bringing up are reminding me of what I learned in neuroscience. Lots of times when we make decisions, we're making them based on our habits, and oftentimes studies have shown you're not consciously making the decision, but afterwards you're saying that it was conscious. The consciousness comes at 0.4 milliseconds after the decision has already been made. You kind of rationalize it using your prefrontal cortex afterwards, and then with your gut, it is good to go with your gut, because your brain can make millions of subconscious calculations every second. That's why if there's an energy in the room, or you have a bad feeling about something, it's usually best to get out of that situation.
Right.
Because there are things that you might realize later on a conscious level that are going on that you don't always get on the.
Yeah, the brain is not a computer, right? The brain is a way more interesting thing than a computer is. Let me just give you an example, which is most of the way on topic for this. When I was in my 20s after college, I moved back in with my folks for a while, and it was an experience of seeing my parents from a different perspective than I had seen them before. And my dad's arguing style is very similar to mine, and my mom's is very different, more emotional, less linear in some ways. And and I found myself mediating between them when they would have arguments, when they would have discussions. And one of the techniques which was most fruitful, and I was surprised by how fruitful it was when my mom said something, and then my dad was about to respond, I would stop him and I would say, Dad, could you just repeat back what Mom just said in your own words? Could you just say what she said? And he was like, yeah. And he would say, boom, boom, boom. And my mom and I would just look at him and go, no, that is not even vaguely what she said, right? Because he was responding to certain cues in what she said. He was not responding to others. He was filling in gaps in ways that made sense to him from his understanding of logic and his understanding of emotion as well. And just the process of articulating somebody else's perspective as best you can often reveals that you think you understand it way better than you actually do. In terms of your question about who to invite, I think that would be a really fun thing to do at one of these, whoever the person is. When somebody says something that the speaker is about to respond to in a very aggressive and dismissive way, say, okay, well, we have a tradition here. The first thing you have to do is rephrase what they just said in your own words before you can respond to it. Because a lot of us will fail at that project, and we will realize that we understand our interlocutor a lot less well than we actually do, when we think we do. Yeah.
So I guess you identify the 5 bad approaches or 5 bad groups with the goal of coming to a conclusion to the topic of mediation. I really didn't hear a conclusion. I was wondering if you could speak to a conclusion.
Yeah. All right. So I think I think implicit in what I said, and I'll make it explicit, is that what is required is a willingness to engage in this kind of dialogue in an open way, in both an intellectually and emotionally honest way, in a way that values the process itself. That if you're going to say that what you are interested in is a pursuit of truth, then you need to acknowledge that that is hard and complex and difficult work, that it is exhausting and costly work, and that it requires a serious commitment on the part of all of the participants. I guess that's the best way that I would sum that up. Yeah.
Talking about creating a community. Could you explain more about who deserves to be in that community, how we decide what community it is? Because, for example, Lafayette in general is one big community.
Right.
Small communities within that. So who gets to be part of what community? And one more question. What is lived experience enough to get a platform? You said there were people that didn't really have any in-depth knowledge, but they could have a lived experience, right? So when do they deserve to be on that platform, and when do they do not?
So I think that, in terms of community, right, there's the Mill series answer to that question, right? And then there's the Lafayette answer to the question, and then there's the United States answer to the question, and the world answer to the question, right? I think that I think that one of the things about something like the Mill series is there are 2 ways of approaching that. One is to say, as I suggested, that if you are going to carry the banner of intellectual and ideological diversity, that is a concept that you need to interrogate, right? And you need to approach seriously. I think that there is a temptation on the part of, in a lot of these circumstances, for proponents of ideological diversity to approach the problem as we need more of a certain kind of voice, right? And it's not casting the net as broadly. And I realize I'm falling into vague generalities here. I think it's a really difficult and complex question, and I think that if you're going to say we're interested in ideological diversity, that needs to be a really thoroughgoing commitment. If your commitment is not quite as broad as that concept suggests, then you should rephrase your mission statement to be more specific. In terms of the community of people who are participating, I think one of the things is that, if it's harder for some people to participate, if it is made uncomfortable for some people to participate, they are going to opt out of participating. And what that means is that their voices are going to be lost from that process. And there is a temptation to say, well, you could have participated if you wanted, you chose not to participate, therefore you are not a relevant part of this community. Well, if you're going to have certain kinds of conversations, who needs to be in the room is you need to be thinking about that in a very serious way. That was the community question. You had another question?
Who deserves to
I think that is again a question that you can't really answer in a sentence. But I do think that it is absolutely essential to acknowledge in this kind of a process that each one of us is coming to a topic from our own subjectivity. None of us are objective. None of us are coming down from Mount Olympus, right? There is a tendency to suggest that somebody who doesn't have a personal investment in a topic is capable of being more objective about that topic than somebody who does, and that's just false. That's just not true. Each one of us is coming to these debates and these discussions from our own perspectives, and the perspective of people who have, intensive lived experience with a phenomenon are more valuable as a result of that lived experience, not less. Yeah.
So you said that decency is important, that we have to be decent to other people involved in the conversation. And while thinking about that, you said the burden of decency falls on those to whom it's, they can walk away from the conversation. They don't have to make their point and just go home and sleep. But the people that you're being decent to usually, or the other side of the coin, usually the minorities, the marginalized and whatnot. But couldn't you also make the argument that asking those people to be decent could cause them to lose, some aspect of some force in making their point?
Yes.
If they have to kind of pull your point.
Yes, absolutely.
And now you kind of just, because then they could say, well, since I can't really make my point, since I kind of have to pull back.
Being decent to somebody and being really, really pissed off at them are not incompatible with each other, right? Being yelled at by somebody is an emotional investment by that person in you, right? If somebody is willing to stay in the room and be really, really mad at me and express their anger to me when they could just walk away, and it might be better for their blood pressure for them to walk away, right? I am being given a gift in that circumstance. So yes, when I say we have an obligation to be decent to each other, I do not mean we have an obligation to be civil to each other. I think that civility is a wildly overrated virtue. I would also say, I say that one of the things that you need to have if you want to be an activist, if you want to try and change the world, is you have to have a willingness to be wrong. Because if we knew the right way, it would be a lot easier to change the world. There's things that I think we know that we're choosing not to do, but you have to be willing to be wrong because you're going to screw up, right? If you are out there in the world trying to change the world, you're going to screw up. And if you screw up, people are going to get mad at you. And it turns out that that's not actually the end of the world. It turns out that being yelled at, it turns out that people being mad at you, people hating you, people thinking that you're a piece of shit, it turns out that that's not actually the end of the world, and you can survive it and you can move on past it. So yeah, when I say we have an obligation to be decent, I do not mean we have an obligation to hide our anger. Yeah.
Yeah, so some research I was looking at recently is about a different type of how different portions of the population interact. And one thing we'll be looking at is something called online specialists. It's basically the 8% of Americans that are like the most active online politically. And you were talking about how you spend a lot of time online, and a lot of the biggest voices are like ones that are just kind of being provocative. Do you think that's because the like small percentage of voices that are online in general are more provocative and more extreme? Or do you think it's just because that's what people gravitate towards?
I think it's a lot easier to get attention if you have a clear brand, right? And it's a lot easier to get attention if you are exciting people by pissing off other people. I was having a conversation on Twitter the other day, and I was saying that there was an incident that happened at a high school, and I found it. I said, from a perspective of, I'll tell you what it was. It was the incident with the students who gave the Nazi salute at the Wisconsin high school, and I said, from the perspective of current Supreme Court jurisprudence, was that protected speech or not? And the answer is, I don't know, because current Supreme Court jurisprudence on student free speech rights is a mess. The Supreme Court has given no coherent, they have no coherent theory of First Amendment jurisprudence in public high schools. So is that protected speech according to the Supreme Court? I don't know, nobody knows. Should it be protected speech? Well, there's like 8 different things that you have to take into consideration. There's a lot of really weird, interesting things. And what I said was, if you ask me, do I think that should be considered for protected speech? My first question is, how long of an answer do you want? My second question is, what kind of an answer do you want? What perspective do you want me to answer it from? And the third question is, who's buying the whiskey? Right? Because it's going to take us a while to get through all of the different pieces. And I had somebody who was like, well, clearly it's not protected speech because X. And I was like, yeah, clearly it's not protected speech because it happened at a school. And I'm like, well, it didn't quite happen at a school. It happened next to a prom. And they're like, well, if it happened as part of prom activities, then it should be considered unprotected speech because, students have been brought up on charges because what they did reflected badly on the school. And I'm like, yeah, and I don't like those Supreme Court decisions. I think those are crappy decisions. I think the idea that if you're going on Facebook saying stuff and the school decides that you are painting the school in a bad light, and so they suspend you from school for what you did on Facebook, I think that's messed up and wrong and a violation of your First Amendment rights. And they were like, yeah, but, and I'm like, I'm not going to give you what you want. Maybe if we were face-to-face and we would have this conversation over the course of 20 minutes, you would get what you want, but I'm not going to just give you what you want in a tweet because I'm conflicted. I have lots of different imperative floating in lots of different directions. I would have a lot more Twitter followers if I didn't keep saying shit like that. Yeah.
Probably everyone in the room agrees that for an organization like the Mill Series, it would not be prudent to bring trolls or knee-jerk contrarians or dilettantes who don't know what they're talking about, or provocateurs, or the wantonly cruel. I think, does anyone disagree with that? I think everyone basically agrees with that. All the disagreement comes with respect to particular speakers. So, I would argue that certain speakers do not fall into any of those categories, but virtually every speaker we've brought has been called at least one of those things. And so I think that's really where the disagreement lies. It's not at the level of those general principles. It's at the level of to whom do these epithets apply and to whom do they not apply. So for example, I inferred that you might consider like Jordan Peterson a dilettante and that he talks. I mean, you didn't say that, but like.
Yeah, I would say he's a dilettante. I'd say he spends a lot of time talking about stuff that he has not studied in any sort of a serious way.
I mean, roaming millennial, obviously, she's, she came to say why she supported Trump. There was no presumption of special expertise, but yes, the fact that she was not credentialed and, no more of an expert on politics than anyone here, was considered a mark against her. I guess what I'm saying is...
I would say you could also probably put her in the wantonly cruel category.
Yeah, well, so that I would dispute, and I'd be happy to, have that specific conversation if you wanted. But I guess my point is the conversation kind of has to be that specific, I think, in order for it to actually be meaningful. Because all of us, again, agree on the principle.
But those principles are not articulated in your mission statement. Right?
Yeah, but okay, that's true. Although, I think that they're not explicitly articulated in the sense that we don't say trolls, contrarians, dilettantes, but we do say we're trying to bring people who provide a sophisticated, intelligent, authentic presentation of some viewpoint that we consider underrepresented, and that kind of
It's a different thing. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying I'm just saying there is a set of values that you articulate, and there is a set of values that you don't articulate. And I'm not saying that you don't live those other values. Again, I know less about the Mill series than literally anybody else in this room. But what I'm saying is that there is a set of values that you choose to articulate and a set of values that you choose not to articulate. And I think that one of the things that does is that it doesn't just influence the kinds of speakers that you bring. It influences the way that people conduct themselves in and around the events that you hold. One of the things that I heard multiple times in my day here, and I will get to you in a second, you are next on the list, I promise. But one of the things that I have heard multiple times in my day here is that there are a lot of people on this campus, and maybe not a majority, maybe it's a relatively small minority, but I have heard from multiple different people in multiple different contexts that they believe that the controversies around the Mill series are making the conditions of debate and discussion and community on this campus worse, not better. That it is harder to find community around intellectual and ideological disagreements as a result of the existence of the Mill series, not easier. And I don't know if that is true as a general statement. So clearly what that means is that the Mill series is not achieving its stated objectives, and it is in fact hindering the achievement of its stated objectives. And so the question that you have to address is, why is that happening? What is it about the Mill series that is creating that? And I would say that from my outsider's perspective, I do not see that building an intellectual community of people who are open and engaged and caring and decent to each other is being expressed in an effective way as part of the Mill series' mission statement. Yeah.
So first of all, I disagree with you on that point because I actually think the Mill series has done a great job of actually providing a place for robust, intellectual, respectful conversation. That's the first point. Because actually, maybe not a student, but as a student, I actually think it has done a greater job of that than any other organization that I know, particularly that has not taken or has taken this particular course into hand. But to also work on the point that he mentioned earlier was the idea that those of us who have the burden of holding that decency, that the stakes are lower. I would disagree with that on this premise that, so if you are oppressed in any which way, if you are marginalized in any which way, the stakes are higher for you to want to engage in a certain conversation. So say, for example, let's imagine someone is being sexually harassed, and the idea of the concept of sexual harassment is not being spoken about. It's until it bothers you a lot, you feel the need to make the conversation a lot. So Sexual harassment has a higher stakes for you than anything else. Same context in the civil rights movement. It's only because it bothers black people to a certain extent that they felt the need to march in opposed to that. So the idea that, at least from that my understanding, and as you say, we should repeat things in your words. So from my understanding, that you said that the burden of building decency lies with those whose mistakes are lower.
In this kind of a project, and I think I agree with everything that you just said, but the distinction that I would draw is that the Mill Series is not an activist organizing project. It is an intellectual project. And it's an attempt to build intellectual dialogue. And so one of the things that was said to me at lunch today, and I don't know if this is true or not, it's possible that it is not true, but one of the things that was said to me at lunch today was that the folks who are most active in the Mill Series tend not to be people who are also activists, organizers, engaged in political organizing. Okay, I don't know if it's true or not.
Here's why, because I lived in the series at Lafayette, and to a fair extent, here's two things. First of all, 90% of Mill Series events, you come in, you see a room of 10 to 15 people, same faces at every bloody event, and no one shows up to them. Do you get what I mean? So there's the idea of what the Mill Series is doing, and this is to everyone. Anyone can hop in, I think. But like, it's sort of, there's the idea of what the Mill Series is doing. Say for the Roaming Millennial event, 95% of people who criticize the Mill Series have never attended a Mill Series event, and that's poor. That's
Okay,
poor.
all right. So let me back off and I was on my way to a point, and I probably shouldn't have framed it that way. The point that I was making is there is a difference between an intellectual project of pursuit of truth and an organizing project. You don't win social change just by convincing people. You win social change by convincing people in power that it is in their interest to do what you want them to do. And one of the ways you can do that is by building a critical mass of support for your cause, but even that is not sufficient in and of itself. It has to be part of a larger organizing project. So if you are engaged in an organizing project, and you have somebody who comes into your organizing project against rape or sexual harassment, and they have a not particularly sophisticated understanding, then if it's important for them to be engaged in the organizing project with you, if it's necessary or useful for them to be in it, then yes, you have an interest in convincing that person. But if I, as a straight white man, want to understand the experience of women with sexual harassment on my campus, I need to be in dialogue with them more than they need to be in dialogue with me in terms of my and their intellectual development. I will get more intellectually, in terms of my understanding of sexual harassment, out of that dialogue than they will intellectually from educating me about the stuff that I don't know about. And so if I want to have them come to me and be in dialogue with them, my interest in the dialogue is higher, and so my obligations are higher.
But isn't that unfair to the women? Constantly, I mean, this is a popular point among the social justice left argument, is like constantly placing oppressed people in the role of educators, burdening them with the role of...
I'm saying if I want them to do that, then I have to make it worth their while. I can educate myself. There's a whole sorts of ways that I can educate myself without putting that burden of labor onto somebody else. But if I'm going to put that burden of labor onto somebody else, then I have to make that labor manageable for them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I first wanted to respond to one of the things that you stated earlier in regards to representation of student actors. From the impression that I have, people who are in organizations on this campus that are associated with social justice, for example, like Kaleidoscope members, I do not believe there's representation of them on the board. If I'm incorrect, you can correct me. But people who undergo training in regards to social justice and facilitation of contentious discussion are not represented by the board of the Mill Series. So in that regard, I do disagree with you. I'm not saying you don't have your own form of activism,
Can I cut in really quickly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say we created a committee at the beginning of this year and invited a number of people who were in Kaleidoscope or kind of social justice activists. And kind of unsurprisingly, they didn't want to be on the Mill Series committee. But we did. So the point is, we extended many invitations and were rejected many times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're right. We don't have representation, but it's not for lack of trying.
And but also on that point, just to put Daniel on the spot, Daniel welcomed it is like, to be fair. I don't actually hold Daniel up to the status of activist when it comes to, I mean, you look at the midterm elections, tell me anyone on this campus is more, more influential than Democrat Dan.
It is absolutely true that there are different kinds of activism on campus, and while my own feelings towards the Mill Series are somewhat ambiguous, I am on the student committee as mentioned. I'm also the president of the College Democrats, and during the election we organized, I think we knocked on 2,600 doors for the election here. So I think activism comes in all shapes and sizes, and it is true that I don't have social justice training.
Yeah.
I think I have done all I can to affect left-leaning political change on this campus, and I don't think, and again, I'm not wholeheartedly endorsing what the Mill Series has done, but I think on the whole it remains a positive force on campus, and I say that from the perspective of someone who is an aggressive left-wing partisan. And so I think, I agree there is some dispute. I think it's not so simple to say that membership in the Mill Series and activism to try and make the world a better place are mutually exclusive.
No, and I wasn't trying to say that, and I'm sorry I left that impression. That what I was attempting to indicate is that the Mill Series is not itself an activist project. And that a lot of the critics of the Mill Series are coming at their criticism from an activist perspective. That was really mostly what I was trying to say. Let's see. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. I also wanted to touch upon, honestly, we can touch upon why some kaleidoscopes, or like the majority of kaleidoscopes didn't even want to partake in that. Like I know personally, I've taken it upon myself, and that was my decision to attend these series, because based on the mission statement, I understand that there's this desire to have equal representation. That is what a lot of activists fight for, quote unquote, equal representation. My issue is that there is a certain labor behind the decision to partake when the execution is skewed. And like, that's just, I think that there's a lot of disagreement, and there's a lot of like issues with that part of the Mill Series. I think sometimes in the execution, a lot of students just don't think that the people who are like brought here are qualified, like you're kind of talking about sometimes. And that is where disputations arise. That is where these issues arise.
It's always about specific like individuals and topics.
Correct.
It's not like, again, no one disagrees about the principles. No one thinks that we should invite cruel trolls or provocateurs or anything like that. We disagree about whether person X or person Y meets that description.
However, I feel like it is incorrect to make the statement that marginalized groups on this campus are represented more than those who are not marginalized, and I feel like that assumption has been stated a lot in this discussion. And the reason I have a problem with that is because we were talking about earlier at lunch how if one is affected by something, it is more prominent in their life, correct? Like kind of what you're talking about with the bothered situation, it's more prominent in their life. If one is not, you stated earlier that a white man typically does not begin his sentence with "as a white man," because they see themselves in this universal perspective. They do not identify with that aspect, because that would then involve some sort of ego. So now we have ego in our conversation. A lot of marginalized groups and a lot of advocates and a lot of allies, they sort of have a sort of identification or empathy that is involved in this conversation, which is why it makes it so difficult for, I would say, people to partake in like the roaming millennial discussion. That's why it did cause such a backlash and it did cause an uprising. Now, my issue essentially with some of the things that have happened with the Mill Series is I think it does cause discussion. I think people do talk about it, but what is the goal? You know, like this is supposed to be an intellectual conversation, it should be goal-oriented, there should be productivity that is stemming from this conversation. It shouldn't be people kind of like crying in the audience and like this emotional labor, this arduous labor that is just evident, and it's just like, I personally don't see the productivity in that, and it needs to be acknowledged in order for productive conversation to happen in the future.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first, just very briefly, yeah, our goal was to get as many people at Lafayette who disagree as passionately as possible in the same room talking about those disagreements. So we've clearly failed because very few people come to our events, and the people who do come are, the same 10 or 15 people, and we have great discussions, but like the social justice activists who really hate Jordan Peterson, or the people who regard Trump as like the present incarnation of Hitler, they're not coming to the events. And those are actually the people we want to come to the event. So I agree, that is our goal, and we have failed.
Yeah, just to bounce off of what May was saying, as another member of Kaleidoscope, I know I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of people from marginalized groups don't feel comfortable at these discussions because for some people in the Mill series and in general, these discussions, like you were saying earlier, they have no emotional stakes. They're just like devil's advocate throwing it out. But for others of us, it has a heavy emotional stake. And it's exhausting for me to have to explain to men over and over again why survivors should be believed. And at a certain point, I'm not going to attend those discussions if I don't feel like I'm going to be heard, because it honestly has an emotional tax on me, and it does affect me and other women every day.
I think it's really important, just to build on that, is to say that if you want to build dialogue, you have to curate the dialogue. You have to curate the discussion, and that's complicated. That's a complicated process. It takes work, it takes moderation, it takes all sorts of different stuff. And one piece of that, I think, is you said you had tried to get Kaleidoscope folks to come, and that they basically said no. And this is the age-old problem, right? And I've got this organization, and it is not as diverse as I would like it to be along whatever axis it is, right? How do I make it more diverse? And the answer is going to people who you don't have a pre-existing relationship with and saying, please join my thing so that my thing can be more diverse, never works, right? It has never worked in the history of the world, right? So what you have to do is a combination of two things. One is you have to build the one-on-one relationships, which is a difficult and time-consuming and hard work process, which may not work. And the other thing is that the framing has to be, not join the thing that I am already doing, but let's build something new together. And you will be a process of making it a different thing. And again, that may not work either, but those are the only two things that have the potential to work. Yeah, go ahead.
So for example, Romy Melania, he was criticized for being a provocateur. And I'm just curious on how you distinguish exactly someone who is a provocateur and someone in a provocative argument, because at the end of the day, a provocative argument is subjective to what I'm comfortable hearing. So how do you balance the two? Because you're speaking about how we need to be able to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations to challenge our own knowledge. But if we're now saying that we don't want provocateurs, but if they are the ones providing that oppositionary view, how do you exactly balance?
I think that a way of thinking about it is to say, are you framing what you're saying in a way that is designed to provoke dialogue and discussion and a coming together, and are you good at doing that, right?
Yes, but I guess what I'm getting at is if I'm clinging on to my own beliefs very strongly, and someone says something that is very different to my belief, even if they were right and I was completely wrong, wouldn't I be just provoked on the basis that their argument was so different to mine?
Yeah, and I think when I say provocateur, I mean something fairly specific. I mean somebody whose goal is to rile you up. Not, it is possible that you will be riled up by somebody whose goal isn't that. And again, when I'm saying this stuff, it is so the distinction between an algorithm and a heuristic. An algorithm is, the formula that you use to get a certain result. A heuristic is an algorithm that doesn't work. A heuristic is a rule of thumb which may or may not be applicable in every circumstance. So what I was trying to do today was two things. One is set out some broad guidelines, and the second is refocus a conversation on aspects of the project which I have the impression have been neglected. Yes, there is always going to be a place for people who piss people off. Yes, there is always going to be a place for people who, in some circumstances, intentionally piss people off. But if your stated goal is to spur dialogue, then you should be bringing people who are interested in dialogue. I guess that's the simplest way to frame it. Yeah.
Okay, so I have just a series of remarks essentially. So, sorry, not a question. But, I feel like a very huge aspect that you, fail to acknowledge for the Mill series is the fact that it provides the sandbox for students to just engage in dialogue, whether it's for the goal of discussing that topic or not. I feel like the topic is just a tool for the people, for the
right.
students to engage in dialogue. So I'm just I don't know why you focused on the pursuit of truth as your main.
Well, that's in the mission statement. That's the reason why I did.
There's also
so I don't get the impression that the goal of the Mill series is to be a debate society, where you're just going to pick random topics and have debates on them. Right. So I think that if what you want to do is have debates that have no stakes, then you choose topics to debate on that have no stakes. Mm-hmm. Right?
No, I'm just saying it's that and the other part. It's not just one part.
Right. But if it's going to be a sandbox, I think a lot of people would say that this is a sandbox that is filled with broken glass, right? That if you are going to create a sandbox, it is your obligation to keep the sandbox clean.
But also, the people that we bring to the Mill series have actual opinions that exist in the real world, and that students will encounter and will have to argue against. Are we training our students to argue against these opinions or not? That's the question.
Well, I think that if your goal is to train people, then what you do is you frame it as training. This is not a lecture series which is organized around giving people tools. It's a lecture series that is organized around something very different than doing that kind of a process. And again, I'll stop there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I know I've raised my hand every
That's okay.
time you talk and other people want to
No,
talk.
it's fine.
But I think there's been an assumption started going in this discussion. We've been conflating marginalized group identity with emotion, with certain arguments, with certain lived experiences. I think we set up this dichotomy of privileged people have this view, and then there are marginalized people scared to go to the event, scared. You could hit someone who is every demographic group as me, and they're deeply offended by the Mill series, and I'm on the student committee.
Right.
Why are we acting as if there's a certain group that is offended and can't come?
Yeah, and if I did that, I apologize. I didn't intend to conflate things in that way. But you're right. You're right. This is about the specificity of lived experience rather than demographic categories as a hard and fast rule. And specificity of lived experience tends to correlate with demographic categories, but it is not a perfect one-to-one relationship.
This semester we considered bringing Alex Epstein, popular pro, so his arguments are basically, he makes a moral case for fossil fuels. Now here's what happens if you're bringing someone like Alex Epstein, is no one engages with his work, but one person reads perhaps one article that sort of just outlines him. Let me give a brief explanation of his views. Views basically is that we need to give a greater weight to fossil fuels at this time in in humanity's development. So, for example, a place like Africa should not be giving heavy weight to green energy at this point because it has too many people under the poverty line that need industrialization to pull them above the poverty line in order to become well off. And African nations should put the environmentalist agenda on the side for now and focus on the moral case for fossil fuels. So that's an example of his argument. But the moment the kind of name comes up, it's sort of what perhaps one person reads an article and the Mill series is bringing him. The first argument is, oh, Mill series is bringing probably someone who's anti-left, and then the argument then becomes, oh, he's probably a climate change denier, and that just fetters the possibility of even having a conversation. So my argument, my question to you would then be like, is there is there a breaking point where, okay, like where we say we bring people, we should not bring people like Alex Epstein, because for example we had 3 events this semester, no one showed up because they were on less controversial, Iran, Venezuela, and postmodernism. But the moment you bring an Alex Epstein, it sort of makes a point that people want to hear a climate change denier. The Mill series is bringing a climate change denier. Then it becomes a point of contention. Then people come to that event. And that's what happened with Roaming Millennial. Event before the Roaming Millennial, we had the Iraq one, it was just a bunch of students. The Roaming Millennial one, everyone wanted to hear why she supported Trump, or perhaps I'm assuming people's reasons, but then we had people showing up. So it's a provocative event that get people showing up to have the conversations. But the more, well, perhaps because the stakes are, because people just don't care about those events as much. So my question is to everybody then is, should we then do the more provocative events that get everyone to come and then everyone's really riled up?
Well,
is there a point in having presenting conversation?
Well, I think that the question is, can you achieve the goals that you are hoping to achieve with the methods that you have at your disposal, right? I think it sounds like what you're asking is, why can't the Mill series bring somebody who is a controversial speaker and then have a lot of people show up and have a really sophisticated, complex discussion? And I think the answer is, well, that's clearly not what's happening, right? And so you have to do something different. And there's stuff you could try, which might or might not work. It's a fairly long list of things that I can think of off the top of my head that you might be able to do. But it may just not be a thing that is doable. It may be that the tool that you have is not a tool that can be used to achieve the goals that you're hoping to achieve.
Just a little broader than just specifically the Mill series, like Professor Van Dyke was saying earlier, like a lot of the principles are very easy to agree with, and they seem universal, not to invite the 5 types of people who don't have an earnest, bona fide desire to foster good discussion. But I have a question about hypothetically, if there are, say, 2 groups of people, or more, it's arbitrary, who all, within their groups, feel that, say, the other groups don't have a bona fide desire, sort of each views the other as not possessing that goodwill. If both of them can think they're simultaneously following these principles and that they have it and the other group doesn't, where does that leave us? I guess I sort of think about it, you're saying it's sort of it's very messy, you don't have, you're going to fail a lot, you just have to try. But especially with the propensity for humans to sort of gather towards people they agree with, and the bias we have off confirmation bias, how does that work if the principles can lead 2 different groups to contradictory conclusions?
I think the closest thing that I can give you to an answer to that is to say 2 things. One is a lot of this can only be done on a one-on-one basis. That what you're talking about is building trust and building community. And that's hard, and it takes a lot of work. And that's the answer that you were expecting me to give. But a level of specificity that I can give is to say that doing that on a one-on-one basis is more effective than trying to do it on a larger scale basis. The other thing that I would say, though, is it has never been easier in the history of the world to expose yourself to the views of people with whom you disagree without making them do work for you than it is today. It is so easy to do that right now, right? People are writing stuff on social media, on the internet. People are saying stuff on YouTube. People are expressing themselves in a million different ways. If I'm in one of those two groups, then I think the first step for me is to spend a bunch of time figuring out who I'm going to follow on Twitter and not follow the people who piss me off in the other group. Follow the people who don't piss me off. Follow the people who I find most interesting. Follow the people who I find, and maybe follow the people who piss me off as well, because I'm going to be challenged and there's going to be this sort of process of osmosis going on. But also just like follow them but not engage with them, right? Follow them but not, and I know this is a risky thing to say, but lurking is really, really productive, right? Lurking is a really good way to get less stupid without looking stupid, right? And it is easier to learn from other people without making them do work than it has ever been before. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a very quick follow-up
Yeah.
question. Specifically on the point that like this is the time when it's easiest in human history to have access to contradictory views. This also seems to be a time of intense polarization, at least in America, and like there's an emphasis on groups, like with what you were saying about one-on-one interaction being very important. So is there any relation between those two? Like obviously the potential is there for pretty much everybody. Well, it seems like the actual rate at which people are doing that is almost lower. Like you also there's all these articles you can find with people having fewer friends.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things about that. I would say, first of all, I would say that you miss a tremendous amount of complexity and cause for optimism if you divide the country into 2 or 3 very broad groups. I would say, for instance, as somebody who has been engaged with student activists since the late 1980s, the left is way better at doing stuff intersectionally than it has ever been before, right? Folks are a lot better at building coalitions across ideological divides, across divides of experience, across divides of all sorts of different things than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I don't, and you know, I, at least in terms of left and liberal folks in the United States, I think there are a huge number of models that you can look to for people doing this really well, and in very productive and effective ways. I also think that we are currently in a state of national crisis that is unparalleled in probably my lifetime. Certainly you have to go back to when I was very, very small, and I was very, very small a very long time ago, to find a similar moment of crisis. We are in a moment when, you know, in my view, we are spiraling into a very, very, very bad place very, very, very quickly. And so of course we are divided. Of course there is tremendous division because the stakes are really, really high and the issues are really, really serious. I don't think it's a bad thing that people are really angry and really scared and really freaked out, because they should be angry and scared and freaked out. And I think one of the things that happens is that there is a temptation to wish that people could get along better, but there are reasons why certain kinds of people can't get along with each other right now, and those are really good reasons. Go ahead.
So what happens when, you know, you're having an argument and both sides have the, you know, you said the example someone, the person is able to walk away, go to bed that night, sleep like a baby. What happens if neither person is able to do that?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you just got to cut your losses, right? Sometimes you just got to say, this is going to a very bad place. I'm sorry. I don't want it to. I don't mean it to. I don't know how to stop it from getting worse other than to say, let's just take a break right now. I think that's sometimes a thing that you need to do. I think that there are some bridges that can't be crossed, right? There are some times when disagreements break a relationship, break a friendship in a way that can't be mended, and that sucks, and it's sad, but it's not always preventable. And the other thing is you get better at it over time, right? It's hard and it sucks and very bad things happen. But if you care about it, if it's a priority for you, and if you work on it, you get better at it over time. And so you're able to cause other people less pain. Yeah. Yeah.
This kind of brings it back to something that I think Professor Van Dyke said earlier. But it does seem like a big part of the, controversy with the Mill series is that people who bring the speakers probably don't think that they fall into these categories. People who disagree think that they do fall into those categories. For the wantonly cruel specifically, can you talk a little bit about the difference between challenging people's views, which, I believe that you're at college, you're here to get your view challenged, but then there is a difference between that and hurting someone, being cruel. And I think a lot of people like to argue that, that person is just, they're just being sensitive. And it's a really difficult line to draw. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I think before I talk about that specifically, I think I intentionally framed this in terms of building a community and dialogue, right? So I am not just talking about the speakers and who is invited. I think that who is invited is a very small piece of this puzzle. I think that the way that people interact with each other throughout the process, including the folks who come, including the way that you set up the speaking agents, all of that stuff is part of it. So this is much broader than just who is speaking and how the speakers behave. There's a line of Kurt Vonnegut's that I come back to over and over and over again, and it's dopey as hell, but it's important. And he says there's only one rule that I know of. God damn it, babies, you gotta be kind. If you can say to yourself that you are operating from a place of kindness, I think that's going to mean that you may not be able to not ever hurt anybody, but you're going to minimize the hurt, and you're going to, when you realize that you are hurting somebody, stop hurting them. And again, this is all very difficult and very complicated, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? Righteous rage is a thing, and it's an important thing. I wish there were rules, right? I wish there were rules for all of this stuff. But I think that this goes back to what I was saying at the end of my speech, which is this is work, this is hard, this is painful, it is difficult, it is not a game, and it should not be treated as a game. And I'll just tell you one example. I'll give you one story. I was at a student conference, and a group of us were hanging out at the end of the day, and I don't even remember what the precipitating event was, but there were 4 or 5 of us who were hanging out, and it was all men except for one woman, and one of the guys who was an undergrad said something, and I have no idea at this point in years later what he said, but he said something that really upset and annoyed the one woman in the room, and she was like, you know what, I can't deal with this, I'm walking out. And he was like, what? What did I do? And I was like, you want to know what you did? You want to have that conversation? Because I'll have the conversation with you. I will do this thing. And so I was explaining it to him, and we went back and forth, and it turned into a really long thing. And I would say one thing, and he would say something in response, and I would say something else, and he would say something in response. I would say something, and he would say something in response. And then I said something, and he said something in response, and it was the same thing that he had said half an hour earlier, which we had had a 5-minute conversation about, and at the end of that 5-minute conversation, he had agreed he was wrong about that thing. And what I said to him at that point was, dude, you are, at this point, you're disrespecting me, right? I am putting in emotional labor, right? I am taking the time and energy to have this conversation with you, and you're not even paying attention to the conversation. You're just playing games with me, right? And he was shocked that I was upset, right? Because he thought we were just talking. He thought it was just a conversation, right? But it was work for me. It was labor for me. And I felt like he was spitting in my face, right? So I think that a piece of the answer is, to just take care with each other and treat this stuff as serious. And I know that's not particularly helpful, but that's the best I got. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to sort of go back to some of the broader political questions, because I think there's a real, I struggle with this personally, so this is an honest question. It's not rhetorical. This is a very polarized time. I agree with you. I think this country is, I haven't been alive that long, but this is in an unprecedented political crisis. And I tend to think that crisis is driven mostly by the right. And I tend to think that a lot of the modes of political discourse employed by the right are fundamentally hostile to democracy to certain groups in this country. But yet, I also find myself concerned at this thought process, because I find myself saying, my opponents are illegitimate, I shouldn't listen to them, I would like to, lock them up. Not that I'm saying, but I see the path, I see where it leads. Right. And so I find myself, as I said before, I'm very conflicted on this. Yeah. I think a large political faction in this country, whose beliefs are held by 40-some-odd% of the population, is engaged in discourse that is dangerous to democracy. But yet, I cannot say I refuse to engage with 45% of the population, right? And
why not?
You can say this in elections, right? And you know what? In this past election, you see it's an election all about turnout. Everyone is go for the base. There aren't swing voters anymore. It's all about getting all the people in the suburbs and the cities, But I think there are real downsides to that. I think there's damage to the civic culture. I think there is serious danger in the long run, right? In the short run, this works to win an election, and God knows I'm happy we won the election. But I think there's real danger to this, and I see the Mill series as an effort to some extent to make some small effort to build bridges. So I content myself with the fact that most of the time I'm a partisan, extreme partisan activist. But some of the time I think it's important to say, well, I would like to win this election. Well, I think it's important that we get the other side out of power as soon as possible. In the long run, we're all living in the same country, and I would like for there not to be another civil war. So I think, I think there's a balance between saying these beliefs are unacceptable. That being said, I don't want to shoot people over them. So I want to win in the short run, and I want to work it out in the long run. So I see, you have to make sacrifices to do that. Sometimes you have to say this belief is an abominable, and I will defeat you in every election, but I'm going to talk to you about it. Because in the long run, and it could take decades, I think it will. So I think I see that's the dispute I'm having with myself. So.
I would say that all of that is valid and all of that is useful. I would say that it's not clear to me that a speaker series is a useful mechanism for doing that. If you had a study group, the problem with a study group is that most people aren't interested, right? But if people are interested in a way that is not productive, right? If it spurs a kind of involvement that is counterproductive, then that's worse than people not being interested at all. I think that if you were doing some sort of a study group, then it would be, and it was moderated discussion, and it was small group discussions, right? Intentionally, so that you have actual dialogue and discussion, not 100 people yelling at each other in a room. that's where the real work of changing minds can happen, right? In actually building relationships. There isn't a shortcut. There isn't a shortcut. There isn't a way to say, okay, how do I reach all of these people in buckets of tens of thousands, right? There are individual people you can reach, there are individual people you can't reach, and trying to reach them takes a huge amount of labor.
But, sorry, can I just...
Yeah.
But I think, I agree with you, it's really hard, and there are downsides to everything. But I think we're trying, especially this semester.
Yeah.
I think we're making, I mean, look, we've got this room here. There is a greater political diversity, I think, in this room than in any of the previous events. And part of that is, we had some more right-leaning speakers, we got some right-leaning people in, we're having you, we get some left-leaning people here. Like this, even this event right now, I think is more progress towards sort of political dialogue between people who disagree than has happened on this campus, as far as I can tell, since I've been here. Every event is not really one side or another, because it's mostly one side, we're a college campus. But I just see this, if the challenge is insurmountable, and if the benefit is, maybe healing, not the country, but start with a few people or a campus, and if we're making any progress at all, I think that's worth even taking huge risks, just because it's really hard to do, right? People have been trying this for decades. So I think we're making a little progress, and I think it's worth it to continue.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that is distinctive about this is that this is a meta conversation, right? Yeah. That this is the discussion about how you have a conversation, right? And so that's it.
Fair, a lot of the other ones were too.
Okay, again. Yeah, so I think I'm not saying that I'm not saying that it is not worthwhile to try and bring people together for this kind of event. Obviously, I think it's worthwhile because I'm here, right? The work that I did on my speech was work of me saying, okay, how can I make myself intelligible to the widest range of people possible, right? How can I say something that as many possible people can hear? So I believe that is important, and I believe it's essential. But you got to figure out how to do it without making things worse. Yeah, go ahead.
So with regards to the current state of the Mill series, I think there is a noticeable difference between the Mill series this semester and the Mill series in the past. And I think that the trajectory is definitely positive. But I think that, you were talking about that, to have productive dialogue, you need trust and you need community. And I think the previous 3 semesters of the Mill series failed in that regard quite extensively to build a sense of trust and a sense of community. Which is why you're having issues with lower attendance now. I think that's a combination of, some of the speakers that were brought, not necessarily all of them. The way that the events were actually run, in some instances, it was just outright provocative and inappropriate in some cases. That really caused a lot of people on the social justice left to lose heavy air quotes.
Social justice.
To lose trust in the Mill series and to lose trust in the project, and as we've said, none of us are disagreeing with the underlying motive of having a dialogue and having a conversation with conflicting ideals. But I think if you want to try to bring in as many people to your events as possible, I think it's going to take extensive work at rebuilding and regaining the trust of a lot of different students on this campus. Which is why you're seeing the same 10 to 15 people, because you've lost the trust of large portions of the student body.
I think that goes back to what you were saying about bringing this guy who believes in leaning into fossil fuels in certain circumstances. I think the answer is that would be a really bad idea, right? Right now, under these circumstances, that would confirm people's worst impressions of the Mill series, right? It would lead people to believe that all of the worst things that they believe about the Mill series are true. And that might not be your intention, and it might be a misrepresentation, and it might be a shame. But as a matter of branding, as a matter of how you present yourself to the campus, bringing a guy whose shtick is we need to be burning more gas and coal it doesn't seem to me that that's where you want to be going right now if you want to be building up this as having a different reputation than it has had in the past. Yeah. Go ahead. I'll get to you next. Yeah.
I guess just my question is this not, this being like some of the messages that you said, is that not unfair to the Mill series? Because when you say things such as like, pursuing truth is hard, pursuing truth is emotional, pursuing truth can hurt people, which, yes, but why is that being applied to the Mill series? There are many, many people on this campus, professors, like you read a textbook, you read an article, making claims of truth. Why are they supposed to be the default? And they are not receiving this lecture about respecting other people. Why is this being targeted to us?
Y'all are receiving this lecture because you asked me to come and yell at me. Like literally, I was brought here to yell at you, and I'm doing what you asked me to do.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Why target the Mill series and not people who are also making claims that they are pursuing truth, that they are pursuing intellectual growth at the expense of other people's feelings? Why can they proceed?
Everything that I just said, my speech, I intentionally essentially didn't mention the Mill series at all. Right after I said, here is your mission statement, during the speech itself, I made no claims about the Mill series. It was just, here is what you should do. Not, you're doing all of these things wrong, but just here's what I think that people should be doing generally. I do think that, like, if your purpose is to lift up underheard voices, bringing Jordan Peterson is a seriously weird thing to do, right? I think that's weird. I think if your purpose is to improve dialogue, bringing the eponymous YouTuber is a seriously weird thing to do, but I could be wrong about both of those things. I don't know. And 90% of the folks that the Mill series has brought, I have no specific opinions on. So everything I say is intended, again, to be about how we should be interacting with each other in all of the elements of our lives where we are engaged in trying to build a community to move us toward truth and to understanding, mutual understanding. And I mean, I speak as a white guy whose sympathies are powerfully with the identity politics left. That is my political orientation. I am on the left. I have a huge amount more sympathy with the portion of the left that is described as the identity politics left than I do with any other political faction in the United States. And part of, again, why I was brought here was that it feels, my understanding is that is a rift which is particularly powerful and particularly strong. And so, I am not only speaking from that political perspective, I am also speaking from my own subjectivity as a white guy, right, who is navigating this world of political debate and discussion as a white guy. And has spent a long time doing that, and that's the perspective that I am coming from. I am also somebody who all of my friends are flabbergasted at how much time I spend talking with randos on Twitter, right? Because if you come into my Twitter feed and you're like, dude, what was that? I will answer if I have time. And there are things that you can do to make me stop answering you, right? And those are things that often happen very, very quickly. But I have productive conversations across ideological lines a lot. And crucially, I am able to retweet and quote tweet people who I disagree with and not have them get piled on by my followers. And I have 50,000 followers on Twitter, and that is really, really rare. And maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that a big part of the reason for that is that I set a model in how I interact with people. And when people don't interact with people in a way that I consider humane and decent, I let them know, right? But also I'm just like, I don't know. I think we can do it. I think it is possible to do. It's work, but I think it is possible to do. You haven't spoken yet, yeah.
So I have many strange political conversations with my grandmother, and one of the problems that I have with her is that her lived experience has led her to believe that white Christians are the most targeted group in America, and she believes this with all her heart, and she has a very negative emotional reaction when I try to disagree with her, and it kind of kills me a little bit, but there's only so much I can do.
Yeah.
And so one of the struggles that I've had with myself is figuring out in what circumstances is an emotional response to something justification for not engaging with it, because I don't want to end up like my grandmother who has this very emotional response. And I think this is sort of like hindered my ability to sympathize with people who say it's just too sensitive a topic for me, I don't want to listen to it, because I just see my grandmother and then I'm like, I don't want to, that's not who I want to be. So my question to you then is, how do we delineate between an emotional response which has rationality on its side, perhaps, let's say, and is therefore worth taking seriously as a reason not to bring a speaker, and an emotional response which does not have rationality on its side and is perhaps not worth considering when deciding which speakers to bring?
Well, a couple of things. First, I think that, one of the answers is, if something is causing you pain, you got to take a break, right? And then you can go back at it again. Whether the reason why it's causing you pain is justifiable or not, right? Whether, whether it's something that you can defend or not, you're going to burn yourself out if you keep banging your head against the wall, even if the wall needs to have your head be banged against it, right? To finish the analogy. That's one thing. I think the other thing is, there is what is a good idea and what is not a good idea, and there is also what is likely to work and what is likely to not work. And so when I said to you, don't bring this dude, it wasn't like, I think this is a bad dude. I have no opinion on whether he's a bad dude. I haven't read his stuff, right? Like, I have heard the one sentence summary. I suspect that I would disagree with him, but I don't know at all enough about him to know whether he makes a cogent point or not. So I'm not saying don't bring him because you're a bad person if you bring him. I'm saying don't bring him because the thing you want to have not happen will happen if you bring him, right? So that's just a matter of what is your goal and what is the mechanism that is likely to lead you to achieve your goal. I think that there are a lot of ways to getting to truth. I think there are a lot of ways to getting to be a good person. One of the pieces of my speech which I left out is a quote from Niels Bohr, the physicist. He said, the opposite of an accurate factual statement is an inaccurate factual statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. And this is one of the things that makes having a conversation difficult, right? Because I say, this is true, and you say, no, the opposite of this is true, and we may both be right. And if you don't believe me, Niels Bohr has a Nobel Prize, so you should believe him. In physics, so he's a science guy, right? So, some people, I guess what I'm saying is an emotional response may be grounded in something that I have sympathy for, or it may be grounded in something that I don't have sympathy for. There may be an occasion in which I have an obligation, a moral obligation to upset somebody, right? My experience as a human being is that the circumstances in which I have a moral obligation to upset an individual specific person who is standing in front of me are very, very rare. Those are tough, right? It's a tough dilemma when it comes up, but it doesn't come up very often. Yeah.
I'm not, I come to a few Meal Series events, every once in a while, so not too involved. But going back to I think it was the first question, someone said, who do we bring to the Meal Series to make it for a successful event? And like throughout this whole discussion, you like said how many people were not effective for their goal. So, and then in your response to the first question, you said that you don't want to pick anyone out, and you had like many people that could be good for the Mill series. So I just want to know, is there? I don't know if you were.
You're going to come back and ask the question again?
Yeah, like I just want to like know. It doesn't matter to me too much, but I just want to know, like, is there someone you do have in mind that could be successful?
Well, let me. I've been thinking about it since the question was first asked, and I've got a way I can not answer it that may be more satisfying. I think that there are debates which are welling up to the surface, right, in our very weird political moment, which are becoming significant and have not been significant and not been salient in a very long time. One of the things in the mission statement is, political perspectives which either are important or may be about to become important, right? We are in a moment right now where we are beginning to discuss, and we are about to be having much bigger discussions within the Democratic Party and to the left of Democratic Party about stuff which has not been on the table at all and which is going to be kind of shocking to a lot of people. Like a speaker advocating for prison abolition, for instance, would be an interesting thing for the Mill series to do, right? I would say that most people on a campus like Lafayette have never encountered somebody advocating for the abolition of prisons in the United States. It is certainly not a scholarly argument that is overrepresented in the national dialogue. It is something that a lot of people in the left are talking about, and I would say it's a legitimately confusing and vexing question, right? Like, it's a question on which people on the left can have all sorts of weird, conflicted responses to. So I think that there are ways in which you could, do the sort of ideological diversity thing, which either A, in that case, are ideological diversity from the left, or issues which cut across traditional ideological lines, right? We are in a moment, I would argue, in which the Republican Party is increasingly ideologically decrepit and incoherent. You've got a president whose own views are in many respects incoherent. So I think there is likely to be, in the very near future, not only a realignment of the Democratic Party, but on the other side of Trumpism, if that is something that we get to actually witness, there's going to have to be a realignment of the Republican Party as well. So who are the people who are the iconoclastic voices in the Republican Party saying that the Republican Party has to go in a wildly different direction? There are a few people that sort of pop to my mind, but I'm not an expert on it. I guess what I'm saying is that if you cut the question of ideological diversity in different ways, you come up with different kinds of answers. Yeah.
I mean, my perception has been that has the ideological diversity that is different than left or right that cuts across party lines. That's been my perception of many of the speakers.
Again, I know very little about.
Well, maybe I'm talking to the room.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. Or something here. But I mean, say what you will about Jordan Peterson. I mean, I don't think he's a traditional Republican. I don't think he says. I mean, he's not American. He's not a Republican Party member. I don't think he's this average right-wing wholesome guy. I don't think, like Camille Paglia, for example, you have somebody who says pro-gay rights, pro-trans rights, abortion on demand at any time. I mean, I don't think this is someone who has a political position that's really represented in the party divide. I mean, I think that's the kind of person we have in there. So.
All of my Camille Paglia arguments are 25 years old, so I'm not going to rehash them right now. I would have to check my notes.
I don't see why the devil's advocates are necessarily in the same group. Like, I can see provocation and all the other ones, but devil's advocate, it's just like, sometimes things we, like, a lot, even people that are making the arguments that they're making from, they don't necessarily come to them through deep study. A lot of the things, the positions that we hold are more of like intuition, or this feels right, oh, this feels good, and I sort of align towards them. So it's not like everyone has this like necessarily deep study every single position they
Right.
It's more as a result of like intuition is what brings people to intuition. So devil's advocate is why I'm just a little iffy on.
So I would say a couple of things about devil's advocate. You all may have noticed that my answer is always, I would say a few things about that. I'm sorry, it's a tick. One thing I would say is that frequently when somebody says, just to take the devil's advocate position, what they are actually saying is, I kind of believe this, but I don't want to take responsibility for believing, right? That is a thing that happens a lot. And one of the things that I said is really important is transparency, right? So if I am willing to say something, I should, if I actually do even half believe it, be willing to say, okay, well, okay, so just hear me out on this, right? There are ways of framing it where you are not abdicating your personal responsibility for making that intervention. That's number one. Number two is I don't think that the classroom, the situation that you described is one, is one which I would describe as devil's advocate. I think that, there are certainly circumstances as a college professor where I have to articulate the views of somebody who I disagree with, but I am not making a brief for their views. I'm saying here's what they believed, right? And that is not like, I'm not saying here's what they believe, now talk me out of it, right? Tell me why Hitler was wrong, right? That's a different kind of a thing. The third thing that I would say about that is there are a lot of circumstances in which I can argue either side of an argument, but it goes to the Niels Bohr opposite of one profound truth is another profound truth, right? When I was teaching at Brooklyn College, I did a sort of a Western Civ course, which was mostly based on primary source documents. And so one of the sets of documents that we would do is an essay by Booker T. Washington and an essay by W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Taking those contesting arguments. Whichever side was losing in that fight in the classroom when the students start debated, I would take whichever side was losing. But I think that they both had a lot going for their position. I wouldn't take a position that I disagreed with. I would take the part of the position which I think was strongest on their part. It's less that I would say that you should never take a position that you can't 100% stand behind. Then that I would say you should never take a position that you can't that you can 0% stand behind. And whatever percentage it is that you stand behind it, stand behind it.
Sometimes, the risk behind, so for example, imagine you're in a class where they're talking about like that kind of stuff, and you don't want to necessarily, because the moment you put your positionality and say you sort of stand behind that kind of argument, it makes you look like this laborious, like, your credibility reduces, you're just another black person talking about why racism is in everything, and you don't want to do that. So you want the case you sort of treat it as a more stronger point. So sometimes, and this is sort of like the case I'm making, is like playing devil's advocate is not necessarily like one abdicating. It is one abdicating responsibility, but sometimes the costs in one holding responsibility that.
I think in a classroom situation, there are different dynamics, right? I think, I think what I was getting at there is that if you are going to be engaging in disputes about stuff that have powerful emotional salience for the person that you are engaging with, doing them the respect of talking from your own subjective position about what you yourself believe is a respect that you can do to them. And there are circumstances in which both parties are going to be comfortable with the kind of debate where somebody is taking a devil's advocate position, right? Where you're just, both of you are just sort of, throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. But what I'm talking about here is how you avoid the kind of negative outcomes that you want to avoid. You know, I guess that's the most pithy way I can say it. Yeah.
So I just sort of like to back up a bit to the initial topic of bashing the mill series or not. It seems like, and this is a question for you and for people here who may disagree with it seems like there's some consensus that in the past semester the mill series has taken on a less confrontational tone and has, well, as Professor Van Dyke said, there's still some disagreement about the trollish quality or not of individual speakers, has brought a set of speakers that are more broadly acceptable. And I think this is partly because some students have taken a role in it, it's become more open to the community. Given those precepts, if the Mill Series is an organization with perhaps a dark and checkered past, which has worked to engage students, including some students who are skeptical of its purpose, and if ideally more students who are skeptical of it become involved, do you think an enterprise built around viewpoint diversity but that takes real, significant, we can veto speaker choices, significant student involvement from people who disagree with it ideologically, do you think that's a viable and worthwhile project?
I think that the project of viewpoint diversity as a concept, I think that the merit of it is 90% in the execution.
Okay.
And it is about what you consider to be what you consider to be viewpoint diversity, and B, how you manage the situations that you create, right? That whether you just, light a Molotov cocktail and throw it into a room, or whether you do things in a slightly more reasoned way. I say that as the guy who takes pleasure in being the only left guy on a panel. That's fun for me, right? So I think it's a worthwhile project if you can do it right. Yeah.
So I think with regards to moving forward with the Mill series, don't want to tell you what to do. We know how that's gone in the past. But my advice would be that it's worth really examining what you want out of it and making that clear and very public. And then examining what happened in the past, what went well in the past, what didn't go well in the past, and what the skeptics of the Mill series, even though you might not disagree with them, since you run it, you probably don't. But even though you might disagree with them, what their reasoning, the core reasoning behind why they disagree with the execution of the Mill series is, and then what you can do to try to address that if you even want to address that. But I think there were a lot of things that happened in the past in which, even if the speaker wasn't necessarily bad, the environment in which it was handled and the environment in which it was set up was disingenuous to the stated goal of the Mill series. And even outside of the actual events, the way that interpersonal interaction was handled outside of the event with contractors of the Mill series and just with the general student body, I think there were a lot of ways in which that was working against what you were trying to do and was being disrespectful to the student body, but also being disrespectful to the other people working on the Mill series. I think it's worth examining why that was, and I don't think that's happening anymore, at least not to the same extent. But once you understand what those were and why that happened, that's where you need to figure out how you can fix it. And that's what I said earlier about rebuilding and rebuilding that trust. Is you have to understand what specifically caused people to lose trust in the Mill series, and then how you can work, like you said, closely one-on-one with these different students on these different parts of campus to try to rebuild that trust if that's what your goal is.
Let me just jump off of that and say one thing about, I said a few minutes ago that I think that particularly the campus activist left in general is really good at doing hard conversations well. There are plenty of exceptions to that, but I think in general it's the case. One of the things that I see more and more in those kinds of activist settings is at the beginning of a session, whether it's a panel or some other kind of a discussion, there is a few minutes taken to develop community agreements about the nature of the discussion. And so you come up with a set of rules for how you're going to conduct the discussion that everybody agrees to. And those rules may vary from circumstance to circumstance, but stuff like a mutual agreement, which is often it's often described as what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here, right? That people are going to be free to say things which are going to be treated in confidence by the group, but that you're going to commit that you're going to take what you learn away. Stuff like step up and step back, right? Everybody should be participating, but everybody should also be paying attention to whether they may be participating more than other folks are. Not all of those would be applicable to a circumstance like this. Some of them would be applicable to a speaker where there are 15 people in the audience, not so much a speaker where there are 150 people in the audience. But adopting a bit of intentionality in terms of how you curate the discussion would, I think, be a really, really useful thing to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of respond to some of the brother. So I agree that a lot of the execution of the mill series, especially regarding specific events last year, was problematic. But I have a couple of just questions, I guess, for you, and to just keep this conversation moving forward. First of all, it's like changes are already being made and conversations are already trying to be held. And I think some people are more receptive to those conversations than others, which is fair because the mill series, some speakers may have put people in positions that were harmful and negative for them. That being said, though, I think there's an attack from the other side that generalizes any mill series supporter. And when I say a supporter, I mean the premise of what the mill series stands for, that then just assumes that supporter to also be a supporter of every single speaker that comes, and then it ends up demonizing every single person that supports the mill series. And I just wonder, how then do you break that if the other side isn't necessarily willing to listen, because they haven't been willing to go to any of these more fixed events where efforts have been made. And I understand the burden is on those that made the mistakes to begin with, but it's, I think, easy to then just say, like, yeah, like, changes need to happen, blah, blah, but if no one's willing to then accept those changes and move forward, what's the purpose then of just saying these changes need to be made? And I'm addressing this to you because you brought up the point, but it's a question for everybody.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that there are like people who don't want to hear it anymore, and I think there's reasons why, because time after time, when they would come to or interact with the mill series, whether in an event or outside of the event, it would just leave them worse off than they had entered. But I mean, and I'm also not disputing that changes have been made. I think a lot of progress has been made this semester, and I think there is a lot of work being done already. And I don't think it's fair that certain, like, just saying that you support the mill series, because there is definitely monolithic treatment of people who are in favor of the mill series. I mean we've said this a lot. I'm in favor of the premise of the mill series. I'm in full support of that. But I think just associating yourself with the implementation of it will automatically bring a lot of negative attitude towards you, and I think that's not always merited. In some cases it is, but it's not always. But I think there has to be a level of understanding that, like, not everyone that has lost faith and lost trust with the mill series is ever going to come around to it. And that's just something that you kind of have to accept and move on. But that doesn't mean that you should put any less effort into continuing to try to reach out to other people who you might be able to rebuild a relationship with.
I think I definitely agree with what both of you are saying, but I think my problem comes when people are still actively involved in protesting the mill series, but aren't willing to engage with the changes that have been made. And so I think if you just want to draw back, I think that's totally your choice. I think no one should be forced to be put in a position that's painful or harmful to them in any way. But I do think that the opposition to the mill series is also doesn't follow any of, or many of your 5 rules that you listed out, and I think that if you state that you do agree with the concept of the mill series and you want to debate it based on what the mill series is doing, you do have to be willing to take into account what they're currently doing. And so I think that if you do want to engage, you also have to be willing to have your opinion changed. And I mean, I'm also part of Kaleidoscope. I'm like super far past that, but in my just experience of like talking with my friends and stuff, many of them, like the word mill series comes up and there's no interest in engaging with what's actually being done, but just wholesale kind of writing it off, which I think is fine if you don't want to engage with it, but if you do say that you're interested in the goals of the mill series and that it's something that you're interested in engaging with, you do have to be willing to see the nuances of that and be willing to engage with that as well.
Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who would like to speak?
Someone raised this point previously, but I'd be curious as to what proportion of the people that have been critical of the mill series, and I know there are people here who are and who have been to the mill series events, but I'd be curious as to what fraction of those people have actually attended mill series events, especially recent events where the discussions I think have been more conducive to reaching this less partisan sort of goal. When even we had an event on, for example, like the Iran and Saudi Arabia discussing that, and that was a lot less polarizing than it seemed to me than previous events. And I think there's a discrepancy between people's perceptions of what the mill series carries out and what it actually, like the types of events that it actually has. And I think if people start to come to more recent events, I think that perception may change. I'm just curious as to that.
Obviously, that's not a question that I really have an answer to, but just to speak to it a little bit, I think what's being described here is, to a certain extent, a branding problem, right? That if you make people really, really, really angry 1 or 2 or 3 times, it's going to take you a long time to recover from that, and it's not necessarily going to be fair. They're not necessarily going to be willing to to immediately recognize that you have cleaned up your act, that you're doing things in a different way, that it's not the thing that they imagine it to be. But that's just reality, right? If people believe that you have done something that if you do something that they really, really don't like, it takes a long time to fully recover from that. One of the nice things about a college is that folks go away, right? So, it's the turnover process is shorter on a college campus than it is in a lot of other circumstances. But, again, there's what we would like things to be like, and there's what things are like. And what things are like is it takes a long time to recover from a debacle. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to just also say that, and I was all abroad and was not able to go to the last few ones, so I definitely want to disclose that. I don't want to pretend I've been to all of them, but I definitely I went to the Roaming Millennial one, I went to all the ones prior to it, and the rest of that semester I continued going to them. And it's just, I think one of the main issues is that, I, for example, am a minority in the sense that I have attended the most controversial ones and have continued to, because I'm still willing to engage in that conversation and willing to do the work of engaging in that conversation. And I definitely do think that that's a minority. I definitely think some students, just reasonably so, do not feel like participating anymore. It's difficult, they don't agree, and I feel like that is why it is so imperative, the selection of speakers is so imperative and should be so closely calculated, because if we are, if the Mill series is going to do something like bring very controversial speakers, I understand the goal. Someone said earlier, these people exist in this world, and I agree, these people exist in this world, we want to graduate college, we want to be able to have discourse with almost anybody. That's a very important skill to have as a citizen. But if we are going to bring someone to Lafayette, if we are going to create a platform, because we have the power to create a platform, if we're going to create a platform for someone who basically for example, she herself did not exhibit the sense of decency, like, and I did not see like a desire to create a community, to create productive conversation. Because if you are just going to vocally state that your opposition is a snowflake or demean them in that sense, it gives off a vibe that's like, I don't take the other side seriously, I don't take this conversation seriously. And if that is the vibe that is given, the productivity of that conversation plummets immediately. Because
did you get that vibe from her from the minute she was on stage, or was it just the video she made afterwards?
I had done my research
others
on
who were
her.
there.
I had done my research on her and I'd watched some of her videos, so I had a bias that she essentially gave me based on the way that she acted. Yeah, I personally, like, even when she was talking, I know that some people, and I'm not saying everyone was correct, there were a lot of very emotional people that came at her really strong, and like, I think she handled herself well, but I knew where she was coming from based on the research that I did on her. So I don't want to say that I had prejudice against her, I just had informed reasoning towards her. And because a lot of people also looked her up and saw what she had to say, and then she followed up with a video that did what you said, equated a lot of people who devote their majors to government and law and devote their lives to studying these things to snowflakes, and then following that up with like a veggie ad or whatever. That shows to me that there is not, that particular speaker did not take even what she was saying seriously. And I think that goes back to the ability, like when you are having a conversation or an argument, some people are able to disengage very easily. And that goes back to this, it's almost become taboo now, this topic of privilege. Because I feel like some people just hear that word and they're like, oh, it's just another like social justice warrior talking about privilege. And it's like, I don't want that to happen, because privilege, there is a privilege in being able to engage in an argument and then disengage from the argument. Because some people are never able to disengage. That is, they're chronically living. They're chronically engaging in some of these topics, a lot of these controversial topics. And that is why when one is chronically and actively having to deal with this, and the system is constantly making them deal with it, they choose to then not voluntarily put themselves in the position of dealing with it again, with opposite, you know what I mean? Like, so I think, if anything, I would like to provide some sort of explanation as to why some of the reactions are like that, because it is a lot to ask for when some speakers, like, if you're going to bring a Trump supporter, and we are very aware of the political climate, this should be an accredited individual that is not going to immediately look at the opposition and call them snowflakes, you know what I mean? Just like it would be for the same with the right. I wouldn't bring a liberal that's going to be like, all conservatives are horrendous human beings who da-da-da, you know what I mean? Like, automatically, one's credibility is knocked down if they're going to use derogatory terminology in regards to how they talk about the opposition, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
And so, I don't know, it's this concept of disengagement, and it's a debate, like this is very common in debate. Some people can disengage, and when you disengage, you don't hold a position. And when you don't hold a position, you're not identifying with anything. So you can, again, like you're saying, if you're a devil's advocate, you can just shoot shots and shoot shots and shoot shots and keep countering. However, if these are people's lives, if these are topics that we're talking about, people's lives are being affected by it, the stakes are just innately going to be a lot higher. It is going to be a lot more difficult to essentially get students to come to these conversations, because they're not talking about casual topics, you know? They're talking about racism, sexism, sexual assault. These are like, anecdotal experience is imperative in these topics because the constituents are human-based. And that is something that I did not see with the roaming millennial, because she was very stuck on logistics, on statistics, on, well, the economy this and the people that. And then when people started to tell their stories and not speak her language they weren't speaking her language. She eventually was like, yeah, well, I know that that's your story, but like, it's not how I see it. So it's invalid to my argument. And that to me just doesn't make sense, because these logistics and stats that you talk about are made up of these people. And like, I know you said it very well earlier about statistics, that's not the origin of statistics, and I'm going to butcher it so you can repeat it. But it's true, like, we can't treat these human experiences as, oh, well, 60% of this is this and 60%, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's inaccurate in a sense, and going against her own ideology. So I just think that's one of the main issues with the that particular speaker. And I do recognize that if the last few events were much better, I'd commend you for that. I personally wasn't there, so I can't speak on it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just like to, I think that's an interesting point, because I think, like, I feel like this whole discussion is slightly, for want of a better word, and there must be one, but it's slightly incestuous in that we seem to be talking about the, like, 40 people who are here and who are, you know, whether Kaleidoscope or the Mill Series or Democrats or whatever, involved in politics in some way. And I think the Roman Millennial event is really interesting, because I know some people did say they were hurt by that, but like 300-400 people came to that. We had we've had several quite interesting academic discussions with really smart academics that have not, I don't think plausibly could have caused anyone any problems, and no one has attended. So I think there's sort of the real problem here, not the only problem, but one of the big things that makes this harder is it's the same group of people on either side of these arguments. It's the same group of people getting upset about things, because the vast and overwhelming majority of this campus is just completely out of it.
Yes.
They have no idea about anything. And I think it's a real problem, because I think it's, I mean, probably it benefits my political side so much, but I think it's nonpartisan to say that we want more people to be involved in politics. And I think it's a real issue if the only way we can get people who don't normally come to these events is to say, outrageous thing X.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think, I don't know, I think it's a tough situation, because saying outrageous thing X and having 300 people show up and shout at each other does not improve the discourse. But neither does...
But it's really tempting.
So, I don't know, I guess, I mean, you have a lot of experience with student activism, so one of the things that's been interesting on this campus is the college has sponsored a couple talks about free speech issues, and they had like 7 people show up to one of them. And then the other one, all the professors made their students go, and they had like 200 people. So I guess my question is, like, do you think having professors drive this is the way to go? Because, you know, students graduate in 4 years. Should we get professors to tell their students? How do you get more people involved?
So, what's the undergraduate student body here?
2,500.
2,500.
It's all undergraduate.
Okay, right. So 250 people is 10% of the campus. That's a huge, huge number, right? 25 people is 1% of the campus. 1% of the campus being in the same room at the same time for a thing is actually a lot, right? If it's the same 25 people every time, then that, you know, you have a decreasing returns. You know, I think one of the things that's really important when you're thinking about how do you build an audience, how do you build more people, how do you get folks more engaged, it's tricky, and there isn't one size fits all answer. I think a couple of things that I would say though are, one is, you know, you do have to meet people where they are. You have to figure out what are the things that people are excited for, people want, and how do you find the sweet spot between the stuff that is going to bring people in and the stuff that is not going to betray your values and is not going to cause the kinds of problems that you don't want. The other thing is that you want to make sure that if people come, they are not turned off, right? You want to make sure that when you get them in the room the first time, they want to come back again. And I think that a problem that the Mill series has been having is the kinds of events that get 300 people in the room are not the kind of events that are going to get those people liking the Mill series and wanting to come back to another Mill series thing. And I think part of that has to do with who is getting invited. Part of it has to do with curating the experience and all of that kind of stuff. You know, one of the things that I always say when people are like, why is nobody coming to our meetings? Is, well, if you didn't have to, would you? Right? Would you go to your meetings if it wasn't a thing that you were already invested in and committed to? Thinking about how you can change the experience that people have once they arrive to make it more likely that they are going to want to come back is, I think, the easiest thing that you can do, because that's the easy, you know, getting people in the door the first time and then getting people in the door again. It makes it a lot easier, and a lot of this is going to to depend on, again, the kind of experience that you're having, whether it is, and not just negative, positive, and that kind of stuff, but whether it's a welcoming experience, whether when somebody shows up to a Mill Series thing who has not been to a Mill Series thing before, whether there is somebody who goes and chats with them for a few minutes, right? Because one of the things that happens is you go to an event, and you go to an event because you're lonely, and you go and everybody else knows each other, and nobody talks to you and you don't talk to anybody because the reason that you're lonely is that you're socially awkward, and then you never go back because the experience was a negative one, right? Thinking about community, not just in the ways that I've been talking about it, but in these other ways as well. I mean, one of the things that's really cool about having my job is that I go to a place and everybody has to talk to me because I'm the reason that they're here. Which is really nice for somebody who is super duper shy and socially awkward. It makes my life a lot easier. It took me, I'll just tell a story which is not directly relevant, but it may be relevant to some of the other organizing work that folks are doing. It took me 20 years to figure out why you serve pizza at a student meeting, right? I had always assumed when I was an activist on campus and for decades after, I was like, you serve pizza because students are always hungry and they're always broken and everybody likes pizza, right? That's the reason why you serve pizza. And it's like, no, that's not why you serve pizza. The reason that you serve pizza is that if you have an event and you have a speaker or whatever it is, and then everybody talks and then everybody, breaks up into their personal conversations afterwards, then if I came and I don't know anybody, then I'm going to slink out embarrassed, not having to have a conversation with anybody. But if after the formal part of the meeting, you bring out pizza and everybody is sitting around the table, then I'm like, is that vegetarian, right? It's easier for me to talk to the other people in the room than to not talk. Because if I'm sitting across the table from you and we're both eating pizza and our eyes meet, it is more awkward for me to not have a conversation, right? This is why not only do you serve pizza, but always serve pizza near the end, right? And then you also make sure that you have people who are deputized, the people who actually enjoy having conversation with strangers, you make sure that you deputize them to do that with people, right? Again, there is no single magic trick to it. It is just about building community, right? And that gets back to the question that you were asking earlier. How do you reach out to people? How do you build these relationships? How do you build ties across ideological lines? You do it by becoming a family in some way. Yeah.
Don't you feel like that the argument that you just presented, if I'm not interested in an event, I'm not going to it, doesn't that like kind of contradict what you're saying? So essentially, like, there are like some really like sad opinions, antiquated, that are happening in this country and everywhere else, and like they have support from like tons of people, and so bringing people like, say, like Jordan Peterson. If I don't bring somebody like Jordan Peterson, like, would those people who share the same opinion ever come to an event or like something that can influence them to change their mind? Like,
what do you think is the contradiction? I'm sorry.
The contradiction is you're saying that we shouldn't bring Jordan Peterson, right?
I'm saying that the justification for bringing Jordan Peterson doesn't make any sense to me. If the justification for bringing Jordan Peterson is he is a name, he will attract a lot of light and heat, he will get a lot of attention, and then we can get people in the room, and then maybe we can get them to stick around for the less famous person who we want to bring next time, that is, whether that's what you want to do and whether that's going to work are empirical questions. What I'm saying is that the justification for bringing Jordan Peterson, which is he is an underrepresented voice on the American campus today, does not hold water for me. That's what I was saying. And again, if you bring Jordan Peterson and the way you get attention is by bringing Jordan Peterson, that's a specific kind of attention, and that's going to brand you in a certain way, and that's going to make people feel a certain thing about you. It's going to be attractive to some people and unattractive to other people, and there are benefits to your organization and costs to your organization. So that's just what kind of a brand do you want to have? Yeah.
If there are two individuals, like specific individuals, who each are like working in good faith, like I said earlier, and like they each really do believe that like the other one, I don't know, like with what you were saying earlier about sort of the Niels Bohr quote about Niels Bohr,
right,
about there being like they're separate
right,
truths, if that makes sense, and they each believe that the other one is somehow in the moral wrong, and they think that the other one is a category that should not be heard. Like, is there any work to be done in that situation? I guess, is there, if the search for truth is a subjective endeavor, or at least it's a partially subjective endeavor, is there any, any solution to a situation like that, or is it unproven?
Well, I think that the answer is the same whether the search for truth is a subjective endeavor or not, right? Because it's not like, even if we say there is objective truth, there's no way that we are all going to eventually converge on that objective truth, right? We are all doomed to be stupid, right? Even if there is a right answer, many of us will never find the right answer. But I think the point of the two profound truths quote that is important is that well, I'll say this and then I'll say something else. The point of the profound truths quote is you can believe in both of them at the same time. They are not mutually exclusive. I believe that as an act of individual social action, me voting is stupid and a waste of time. Because I live in New York City. I have never had an election that was decided by one vote. I am almost certainly never going to have an election decided by one vote. If that is going to happen, I'm going to know when it is, right? And it's certainly not going to be, 2018, when all that was on the ballot was somebody who was going to win by 90 points and a bunch of people who were unopposed. It wasn't really, I knew my vote wasn't going to make any difference, but I made sure that I got an absentee ballot. I made sure that I submitted it because voting is important to me. I believe in voting. I believe that voting is a big deal, even as I recognize, as well as a third profound truth, that we are never going to get the kind of society that I want to have by voting it into existence. So those are three things which you could easily argue are mutually exclusive from each other, and I believe all of them with all of my heart. But you're asking another question as well, right? I think, which is, what about when the two positions are mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah, I feel like that's at least I feel like it's a little bit represented, because I don't mean intellectually mutually exclusive. I mean people don't want to have the discussion.
Right.
And maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong, but they both don't want
Well, if both of them don't want to have the discussion, there's a real easy solution, which is that they don't have the discussion.
But, if we're in a position politically today where that's really common, it doesn't have to be politically, but what happens if that's if gridlock's the answer? Is
right.
Are we just doomed to a situation in which large pluralities in the country are uninterested in having discussion with other large pluralities? I am really, really, really afraid that things are going to get a lot worse in the near future and stay really bad for a really long time. But, having said that, I also know that things can get a lot better. I also know that things can improve. I also know that I have two kids. They're 11 and they're 15. If either or both of them turns out to be gay, I know that they will not hate themselves for being gay. That's not nothing, right? That's not an insignificant thing. That is a way that the world is a lot better than it was 10 minutes ago, right? We can get better. We can help each other get better. We can make choices in our lives that make the world better. I believe that with all of my heart.
Part of that is having conversations with other people. Part of that is being open, being decent, being honest, being kind, all of the stuff that I talked about. But another really big part of that is organizing the hell out of the projects that we need to win and winning, right? Convincing people, making connections with people, building community with people is important, but winning is also really, really important, and those are not the same project. There is overlap, but not as much as you would think. Let me just say one more thing about that, which is another thing that was in an earlier draft of my speech, but got cut. You don't win by being right. I think I said that earlier. You win by doing one of two things. If you are trying to make change in the world and you don't have the power to make that change yourself, you win by doing one of two things. One, you seize the power that you need to make the change, and you make the change once you have that power, right? And there's a zillion different ways to take power, right? You win an election, we all know that there's a lot of different ways to gain power in a circumstance. The more interesting one, and the one that a lot of times we don't describe as specifically as we should, is if you're not able to take power, then the way that you win is you convince the people who have power that it is in their interest to do the thing that you want them to do. You create the situation where their path of least resistance is to do the thing that you want them to do rather than the thing that somebody else wants them to do, right? And sometimes a part of that process is changing minds and convincing people, but it is never the whole thing, and it is never more than a part of it. So how do we make the world a better place? We do all of the stuff we've been talking about tonight, but we also get the hell out there and we organize and we win. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have kind of a question about, you were talking about community earlier. I think I agree with you that, what the Mill series is failing has been that it's failed to create a community, but I'm also slightly skeptical in that, I guess, if the project of the Mill series is to create an intellectually diverse environment by bringing, not provocative, but maybe controversial speakers, I think in many ways that's against the concept of community, in that communities, generally speaking, in all human history, are collections of people coming together kind of as coming together out of interests that bind them. Always, for some reason, the only phrase that can come to mind is safe space, and I hate saying that, but the community is supposed to be a safe space in that way. So I'm wondering if, it is, my conception of this might be wrong, but I feel like there has to be a balance between, if you try to create, you can't have a complete community, because by doing so you might be, you wouldn't be able to have an event called Why I Supported Trump. I'm not sure if this is making sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. And I think my answer is that you can create a community in which, you can create a community in which people feel like their differences are respected. You can create a community in which people feel like standards of behavior are adhered to. You create a community in which people feel like the other people in that community have their backs, even across differences of ideology, differences of background, differences of whatever. And every successful political movement that has ever existed has contained serious divisions of demographics, background, ideology, tactics, belief, all of this kind of stuff, right? And the differences between the ones that are able to hold together and the ones that aren't are the ones that can, where you can build bridges across those divides, right? There are certain things that are easier to do than others, right? There are certain kinds of divides that are easier to bridge than others. I think one of the things that you need to be able to say in a situation which is going to be tense is, I know these parts of the situation are going to suck, but I know these parts are not going to suck. And what's really important to me is that these things don't suck. If I am worried that these things are going to suck, then I am not going to go. But if I know that these parts of it are not going to suck, then I will put up with the parts of it that are going to suck. And everybody's answer of what's on each list is going to be different, so it's never going to be a community that includes everybody in the space, and you have to make all sorts of different choices around that. But I think you can do it. You can't do it without limitation, but you can do it with fewer limitations than most of us do most of the time. Yeah.
So going back to your previous train of thought, essentially, if I get this right, essentially what you said is winning is sometimes more important than convincing, right?
Right. Well, that convincing isn't necessary or sufficient to winning.
Okay. So I totally disagree with that, just because like there's like a essentially empirical historical evidence for that, and that's like the transition between the Obama administration to the Trump administration. Obama was doing exactly like what's right, and which in sometimes like didn't align with the good of like some people. Okay, so for example, like coal mining, for example, like that just like is like didn't agree with like what some people were doing. So when Trump was running, essentially it takes just a little bit of like, I don't know, like emotion and like a little bit of convincing to turn people over to the other side. So
Trump lost the popular vote by several million votes.
Yeah, but
so he won without convincing.
Like a million out of like 3 million.
No, he lost by like 2 percentage points. His loss was huge. Right.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. You have to convince the people that you need to convince.
Exactly. So
but that doesn't mean you need to convince everybody. It doesn't mean you need to convince a majority of people. It doesn't mean that convincing people as a concept is what you need to do. What you need to do if you're Donald Trump and you want to win is you need to convince a certain number of people in certain states. You need to make sure that the vote is suppressed in other states, right? That's not about convincing people, right? That's about creating the electorate that you want to have, right? It's about having the get out the vote that is useful to you. It's about, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into winning a presidential election.
What I said, like what I'm saying is convincing those people that he wanted to convince was a bit easier just because they thought that they're...
Oh, I'm not saying that convincing people is not a part of winning political campaigns or organizing campaigns. I said multiple times that it is. What I'm saying is that convincing a majority of people is neither necessary nor sufficient. That it is a part of most campaigns. But in some cases, you can win with only a small minority of people supporting you. In other cases, you can have a huge majority of people supporting you and you still won't win. So dialogue, debate, discussion, convincing people is one of the tools that an organizer has. But it is only one, and it is not the most important one in most cases. Anything else? All right, thank you so much. Thank you.